Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months. Kia ora, Bolt fam, it's the director. Chargers fans, man, last week was rough, dudes. As probably most of you guys know, I tested positive for COVID last week. And as you can probably tell, I'm feeling a lot better, and it's really good to be coming back to the content. Still not quite 100%, but definitely feeling like I'm definitely up to coming back and talking a little bit about the Chargers, especially as we are just 2 days away from the kickoff of training camp. But that's not what this video is about today. No, this video is actually something I found quite interesting when reading some comments on Twitter, okay? And it actually kind of sparked the debate that I want to have in today's video. Now, you rewind back to season of 2020, right? Wild season. And at this point, the Chargers had drafted, maybe unknown at the time, the rookie of the year and eventual superstar for the Bolts in Justin Herbert. But if you guys remember that season, there was a ton of drama involving the Chargers quarterback situation, right? At the time, Tyrod Taylor was being hailed as the Chargers locked-in starter, even after drafting Herbert in the first round. But before that, there was an awful lot of talk about Tom Brady joining the Bolts in LA. So much, in fact, that many of us believed that number 12 would be our quarterback in 2020. And it was absolutely insane. And in the end, despite all the Tyrod talk, the Chargers did walk away big winners with Justin Herbert. But the question still remains. And again, this is something I found very interesting over the weekend. Would the Chargers have won a Super Bowl if they had signed Tom Brady in 2020, if the rumors were true that he wanted to come to LA and that ended up happening and resulting in a championship? How would that have changed the course of destiny for the Chargers? And it makes some people ask, and this was honestly the question on Twitter that I saw, did Los Angeles make the right call, right? Did they make the right call by not signing Tom Brady and instead going with, that time, Tyrod Taylor and then eventually Justin Herbert? So let's open it up for debate. In this video, of course, you're going to hear my side of the story and why I think I'm very firm on my opinion of the Chargers' decision to either take Tom Brady or not take Tom Brady. It should be a very interesting one. So before we do get started, guys, question in the comments like we always do. And this, again, it's kind of a tough one to ask Chargers fans. Would you rather have Tom Brady under center for 3 years and with it a likely huge elevated chance at a Super Bowl victory, the first in Chargers history, or would you rather roll the dice with Justin Herbert? So Tom Brady with a likely Super Bowl win or Justin Herbert, let me know in the comment section below. Before we do kick off, guys, hit us up with a like and sub if you do enjoy this Chargers content. The small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification helps me out a lot. Let's get into this one, man. This should be a hot debate. Lights, camera, action. Tom Brady versus Justin Herbert. Did Los Angeles make the right choice? Did the Chargers make the right choice in not taking Tom Brady and instead going a different route for their most important position at quarterback with Justin Herbert and Tyrod Taylor? So first off, let's jump back to 2020, right? This first segment's called From Worst to First. And a big reason why this debate is brought up is because of the end result with the Buccaneers signing Tom Brady, eventually winning a Super Bowl in 2020/2021, right? And honestly, this is a pretty legitimate question, and it's one that I actually see brought up quite often. Maybe not as often as last season, but definitely often enough that I've been kind of wanting to make a video on this for some time now, and it's time to maybe try and at least get my opinion out there on the channel. Now, again, legitimate question, because I actually believe that Tom Brady was the secret ingredient to the Buccaneers all of a sudden becoming a Super Bowl threat, because the roster for the Buccaneers in 2020 wasn't anything especially spectacular, right? They were good, but not very many people considered them elite, and that really came down to their quarterback situation. Their offense did have some solid pieces, however, right? They had Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Cameron Brate, I think, was tight end one at the time, and then a few solid offensive linemen. But it was their defense that was their best trait in 2020 by far. They had JPP, Devin White, Levante David, Shaq Barrett, and then a slew of young studs like Jordan Whitehead, Carlton Davis, and eventually Antoine Winfield. But at the time, like I mentioned, their quarterback situation was holding them back. And with Jameis Winston looking for a new contract, the Bucs needed to make a move at QB right away. Because without a reliable quarterback, it felt like this team was stuck in purgatory, much like a lot of teams in the NFL where they have a really solid roster all around, but that quarterback position is lacking. It takes a lot for those teams to find success, especially in the postseason. Now, this all changed when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers decided to sign Tom Brady. Big breaking news of the 2020 offseason. Tom Brady on the move for the first time, and he does land in Tampa Bay. And all of a sudden, you're looking at players like, Mike Evans, Godwin, the offense. They look transformed overnight. That team all of a sudden became a very legitimate Super Bowl threat because of the signing of Brady. And then the Bucs, on top of that, doubled down on the offensive line to protect Tom Brady by drafting stud right tackle Tristan Wirfs. This also inspired a lot of free agents to stay with the team, maybe with a more team-friendly contract. And this resulted in a major transformation, right? The 2019 Bucs, who only saw a 7-win season, were no more. This new 2020 unit would end the year 11-5 along with a world championship. This was huge, and it was a very quick turnaround, a very quick transformation, and all of it, I would have to say, is because of Tom Brady. You can, of course, credit a Bruce Arians as well, but still, Brady was the secret ingredient. Now, what was happening in Los Angeles meanwhile, right? So this next segment, meanwhile in LA, the Chargers at this time in 2020 were in a very tough transition stage, right? They had just lost Phillip Rivers, and for the first time in almost 2 decades, the quarterback situation was unclear. Now, the season beforehand, the Chargers did sign Tyrod Taylor to be their backup quarterback, and in my opinion, the eventual starter post Phillip Rivers. I feel like this was always sort of the plan with Anthony Lynn, Tom Telesco, and that coaching staff beyond the 2019 season. Now, head coach at the time, Anthony Lynn, had proclaimed multiple times that the veteran quarterback Tyrod Taylor was the unquestioned leader of the offense. But this did not stop the rumors from flooding in. If you guys remember, this whole situation with Tom Brady was absolutely insane. One of the best players, if not the best player to ever play the game, on the move for the first time. Of course, there were a lot of teams involved in terms of rumors and great fits for Tom Brady, and this was insane. Brady was on the move for the first time in his career, and the Chargers were among the top teams of potential fits. Of course, we also had teams like the Indianapolis Colts, the Vegas Raiders, and then, of course, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who ended up being the signing. But you know what? This sparked quite a lot of bit of debate among the fans for the Chargers, right? A lot of us had our opinions on whether or not we wanted Tom Brady on the team. Did we really want a 42-year-old quarterback, one that may not, live beyond the legacy of the New England Patriots? I don't know. I think there was many of us that were against it, but also a lot of fans that embraced the whole idea of it. Me personally, I was really on the fence about it. I was still fresh off, let's say, the trauma of losing Phillip Rivers, one of my childhood icons, one of the reasons I became a Chargers fan. And this whole idea of a new quarterback was kind of hard for me to get this idea was hard for me to get my head around. That's what I'm trying to say there. But still, I have a feeling that it was very close to happening. I think Tom Brady to the Chargers was very, very close to becoming a reality, at least on Tom Brady's side of things, right? The Chargers had a decent roster at the time. If you take a look at the 2020 Bolts, they featured guys like, Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, Mike Williams, Hunter Henry on offense at the time, and their defense was not in a bad spot either. They had Joey Bosa, Melvin Ingram, Casey Hayward, Rayshon Jenkins, and a few other studs as well. That defense would actually end up ending the season as a top 10 D in the league. Very nice roster. And it was a solid landing spot for Tom Brady, right? Because the Chargers, like many other teams, were a quarterback away from being a legitimate threat. And even beyond football, I think Tom Brady was ready, to maybe make the move to LA himself. He was already establishing roots in Los Angeles. I think he founded a production company nearby the team. He wanted to get involved in the production side of football, which I still do think are in the cards for Tom Brady after his football season or his football career is over. But it felt like this was maybe not in the plans for the Chargers, however likely it was for Brady and the landing spot and the fit. I don't know if the Chargers at least had Brady in their plans, at least not Coach Anthony Lynn at the time, right? Because it felt that Anthony Lynn was so adamant about giving Tyrod Taylor a solid shot at being the starter that he didn't even consider Tom Brady at the time. Something proven to be true, even, with Herbert's monster debut versus Kansas City, it always felt like the story was Tyrod Taylor is the leader of this team. And you guys remember that infamous saying at that presser with Anthony Lynn, he's a backup for a reason. That ended up not being the case, and maybe one of the reasons why the Chargers decided to eventually move on from head coach Anthony Lynn. But in the end, however strange, it worked out for the Chargers and Justin Herbert, right? But what if things had been different? And that's kind of the whole point of this entire video. Now that we got everything set up, the stage is set up, what would have things looked like if the Chargers, among all these potential fits, were the ones to land Tom Brady? So this next segment is called A Look into the Multiverse. What would have happened if Brady signed with LA? Well, first off, let's look at the cap situation, right? The Chargers were working with somewhere in the realm of around $30 million in 2020, and they used this cap space to sign a few guys like Brian Bulaga, Linval Joseph, and Chris Harris Jr., right? And some of these signings would turn out to be okay. Of course, there's guys like Bulaga that did turn out to be disasters, but in this situation, in this scenario, that doesn't likely happen. We don't see these guys signed because Brady would have swept up most of that cap space. I think his cap hit for the Bucs in 2020 was $25 million. Now, the Chargers could still move some money around and maybe sign a guy like Linval Joseph and a handful of other smaller contracts, but the draft would certainly be, the source of where they're trying to improve, and that would have changed dramatically as well. Now, the Chargers in 2020, they held the number 6 overall pick in the draft, and as we know, the Chargers did select Justin Herbert with this pick. But in this alternate reality, with the Chargers having signed Tom Brady beforehand, I believe the Bolts take a different approach. With the talent still on the board, I believe that the Chargers would either draft Derek Brown, defensive tackle, or Isaiah Simmons, and between the two, it really felt like Isaiah Simmons was the most likely. So instead at number 6, instead of taking, Justin Herbert with that pick, they will have selected Isaiah Simmons. And Herbert would have likely in this scenario been drafted by the Carolina Panthers or Jacksonville Jaguars just for, snits and giggles, just to see what would have happened there. And whatever team landed him would have obviously taken on a huge transformation as well. But beside the point, later in the draft, the Chargers would also trade their 2nd and 3rd round picks to the Patriots to acquire Kenneth Murray. They likely also don't do that in this scenario. Instead, I do have the Chargers at pick number 37 taking guard Robert Hunt, and then at 71 taking linebacker Zach Bond. Now, ultimately, this would have resulted in 2 solid additions, including, I should say, Simmons as well. So 3 solid additions, linebacker/safety, and another linebacker in Zach Bond, and then a guard in Robert Hunt. You could even trade out Zach Bond for, let's say, an offensive lineman because the Chargers were in a bad spot at that point, especially if they hadn't signed Brian Bulaga, who, again, seemed like a good idea at the time. But the offseason would not end here ultimately, right? Later, Brady would phone his career partner Rob Gronkowski, who would ultimately come out of retirement to join Brady in powder blue. And this would put the Chargers at this point, having added Tom Brady, Rob Gronkowski, the rookies, maybe a couple of smaller free agent signings. This would put him in a tight spot in terms of cap space, but one that would really bolster the Chargers roster, right? Especially at that quarterback and tight end position. That tight end position would look very similar to Gronk and, let's say, Cameron Brate with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2020. But beside the point, at this point, the roster would look as such. I'm just going to list off the names, okay? Quarterback, you got Brady. Wide receiver, you got Keenan, Mike, and then Jalen Guyton. At halfback, you got Austin Eckler. Offensive line, keep this in mind, you had Sam Tevy, Lamp, Feeney, Hunt, and then maybe a free agent right tackle. The Chargers would not roll out with whoever they had. I think it was Tyree St. Louis at the time. At tight end, they had Gronk and Henry. Defensive end, Bosa, Ingram. Defensive tackle, Justin Jones, and then maybe another free agent. They had Kaiser White, Drew Tranquil, cornerback Casey Hayward, Michael Davis, and then at safety, Derwin and Jenkins. Pretty solid, right? Pretty solid group. But it did have its flaws. The O-line would be in a very tough spot. The defense would maybe suffer without the additions of guys like Linval Joseph, even Chris Harris Jr., but maybe you could insert some free agents or other rookies in those spots. Either way, that's a rough idea of what the roster looked like. But still, this team led by Tom Brady, I think it would have been something. How would have it performed? So let's take a look at this, right? In this next segment, it's called Alternate Reality Record. And in this exercise, we're going to go through each game of the 2020 season and try and predict a simple win-loss versus the teams of that year. And this also takes into account Brady's performance in 2020, which was something ridiculous. Okay, I know that he threw for over 5,000 yards, 40-something touchdowns last year. I think it was pretty close to that even in 2020 as well. He definitely proved that he had a lot left in the tank when joining the Bucs. Either way, with the Chargers, how are we looking? And again, I'm going to kind of just list these off, okay? So the 2020 schedule kind of went as such. Week 1 at Cincinnati. I got the Chargers winning this one 24-13. Even in real life, they won that one versus Joe Burrow, even with the Tyrod Taylor under center. Week 2 versus the Kansas City Chiefs. I got them losing this game 31-37. The Chiefs at the time still a very powerful team. Week 3 versus Carolina. I've got this one as a loss as well. Surprisingly, I think this had a lot to do with the defense in real life in that game. So we're going to keep that as one of the outlier losses of the seasons. Week 4 versus Tampa Bay. I got this one as a big win. Of course, Tampa Bay is going to have a different quarterback under center. And I think this is going to lead to some growing pains and a pretty big collapse for Tampa Bay in this one. I got the Chargers winning this one 31-18. Week 5 versus New Orleans. I got this one in the loss column, 27-30. I think this was the last hurrah of Drew Brees, and one that would prove very difficult for the Chargers. Week 6, we got a bye. Week 7 versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. I got them winning that one 39-25. Week 8 versus the Broncos at Denver. I got them winning that one 34-30. Week 9 versus the Vegas Raiders. It's going to be a win 31-28. Week 10 versus Miami. I got that one as a win 34-29. I got Week 11 as a win versus the New York Jets 34-24. Week 12 I have as a loss versus the Buffalo Bills 27-24. And then the next, 5-6 games, they're going to go on a winning streak to end this season. Versus New England, 45-37 is a win. Versus Atlanta, 24-17 win. Versus the Raiders, 30-27 win. Versus Denver, 27-16 win. And then at Kansas City, 38-21. That's another win. And this would put the Chargers, again, in a very big hot streak at a record of 12-5. This would end the season second in the AFC West. Keep that in mind to the Kansas City Chiefs, who at this point would be 14-3. Not much changing for them in that team. But this would clinch the Chargers a wild card spot. Now, this likely puts the Chargers against the Browns in the first wild card game, and they would win this one 42-33. Next would be a very, very big game, and one that would honestly be a defining moment in this signing of Tom Brady. I have the Chargers versus Kansas City Chiefs in the next round of the playoffs, where I feel the Chargers might actually stumble. At this time, the Chiefs, you have to remember, were a powerhouse and would eventually represent the AFC in the Super Bowl versus the Bucs. I've got us losing this game 38-31 and ultimately knocking the Chargers out of the playoffs, even with Tom Brady under center. Now, for kicks and giggles, this would result in a Packers versus Chiefs Super Bowl, of which I would hope the Packers take, but that's, hardly matters at this point. The Chargers in this scenario are already knocked out of the playoffs. Now, what does this kind of amount to? Well, this next segment is called Timing is Everything. Now, the Chargers were in a tough division in 2020, and they remain in a tough division in 2022, as we were to face, at that time, the former Super Bowl champs twice a year. Brady and the Bucs had no such issue, right? Sure, they had the Saints in that division in the NFC South, but they paled in comparison to the 2020 version of the Chiefs in the AFC West. I do believe that Brady and the Bolts would have been a wild season in 2020, and to some maybe considered a huge victory if the Chargers made it that deep into the postseason, getting very close to their first Super Bowl appearance since '94. I don't think that the timing, was right, however, to take the AFC West. As awesome as that would have been, I don't think it amounts to a championship because of the timing. And this would be true in Brady's follow-up season as well in 2021. I think that the Bolts would have, stood a much better chance at usurping the Bengals in 2021. That maybe leads to a Super Bowl appearance for the Chargers, but they would have had to face the loaded Los Angeles Rams. And that's also a matchup that I don't think even a Tom Brady-led Chargers could overcome. Then comes 2022, right? Which saw Brady both retire and unretire. And I think at this point, it would be Brady's last shot at winning another ring, especially for the Los Angeles Chargers. And one that would ultimately, in my opinion, fall short. Because at age 44, going on 45, I think as amazing as Tom Brady is, this roster just wouldn't be ready to take on what is the most insane AFC division that we have maybe ever seen. Now, with Brady only accounting, let's say, for $12 million in 2022, sure, the Bolts could still have, added some star power, but not nearly as much as we've seen in real life this year. And the pressure would be on for the Chargers. Likely your last shot, your last season to prove that the Brady experiment was worth it. But again, with the Raiders, the Broncos, these teams transforming overnight, I think the timing is unfortunately, once again, not in Brady's favor. And this is also likely grounds that Brady would not come out of retirement. I think if he took one look at this division, what these other teams are doing, he might think the competition is too stiff and call it a career. So at this point, the Chargers would be in some, pretty hot water in terms of what they're going to do at the position of quarterback. So what does this kind of lead me to in terms of getting close to a conclusion here? Well, in my opinion, Herbert is the key to all of this for the Chargers. This is where we come to reality, or back to reality. We start looking at the situations for the Bolts, okay? Herbert, not Brady, was always the best decision for the Los Angeles Chargers. Even if we didn't know it at the time, right? There was a lot of people, a lot of speculation that the Chargers, not the Bucs, would have won a Super Bowl had we signed Tom Brady. But in the end, after taking a hard look at the team, the rosters, the cap space, and everything, I think Herbert is the key. Because you see, with Brady, timing is a huge component to this entire theory. One that tells me that maybe the AFC West wasn't ready to, let's say, relinquish the Chiefs' authority over the division to a Tom Brady. Even as good as Tom Brady is, the timing just wasn't right. But as an added factor, talent is almost equally as important when it comes to Justin Herbert being the right call here. Because Herbert isn't your average quarterback. He's far from it. This kid is the best quarterback to enter the league in the history of the sport. And as amazing as Brady is, that counts for something big in terms of Justin Herbert's favor. With Herbert entering the league in 2020, this gave him time to blossom, to settle into a tough division in the AFC West. But as incredible as Herbert has been in his first 2 years in the league, the timing was still not right. The Chiefs were still red hot. The coaching was terrible. The roster was incomplete. I just don't know if it was time for the Chargers to step up, even with the Tom Brady, to take the division. But Herbert did more for this team than what it looks like on the surface. He instilled change. Because when a team lands a quarterback like Justin Herbert in the draft, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity presents itself. It's time to go all in, overhaul, transform into a championship organization. And it started with the Chargers realizing Anthony Lynn was not the answer. Herbert had a big hand to play in this, because Herbert's talent led to a very important decision in replacing Lynn with Brandon Staley, which was a majorly important component for the team moving forward. Because Staley, much like Herbert, is part of this change in culture that we needed so desperately. As I believe under Staley's leadership, the Chargers got close, again, to a big season 2021, fell just short. But however, the biggest thing that he did was instill change in culture and change in mentality. We're not just the Chargers that skied on by anymore. We're here to compete. It's time to throw down. Go all in. Take full advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity when drafting a talent like Justin Herbert, and I believe Brandon Staley was a very important piece of that formula. Staley, along with Tom Telesco, delivered this year. This roster is ready to take on the brunt force of the loaded AFC West. From top to bottom, this team is absolutely stacked. And not just at quarterback, but everywhere. Because you see, when you take a broad look at this, right, the situation, the scenario, in the Brady scenario, yes, we stood a solid chance under his talent to go all the way. I think Brady gave the Chargers a great chance to maybe make a championship run. But in this division, in this conference, in this era of AFC West football, I think it takes a generational talent at quarterback and more, plus some. And that just wasn't in the cards for the Chargers if they had decided to sign Tom Brady. They would have had one of those components, maybe one of the best to ever play, but not the full formula to take the division. So my last segment here called Avengers Assemble. This leads me to my final point. Everything happened the way that it needed to happen. Rivers retired when we needed him to retire in order for us to have the confidence and decision-making to draft Justin Herbert. Herbert was drafted the year that we could obtain him. Unfortunately for Tyrod, he insanely, by the wildest of circumstances in that injury, opened the door for Herbert to start early in 2020, which led to a huge explosion of talent at quarterback for the Chargers. The firing of Coach Anthony Lynn, the hiring of Coach Staley, the bolstering of the Chargers roster, all of this while the Chiefs have now begun their decline. Sure, they're still a powerhouse and want to take very seriously, but not as much as they were in 2020. They're having their issues now. And finally, with all these elements in place, with Herbert ascending to being one of the greatest to ever play in his first 3 seasons, with the leadership and Brandon Staley in the change in culture, the talent all elevated, I feel like the Chargers are ready to strike. The timing is right. And none of this would have been possible if the Chargers had instead signed Tom Brady in 2020. We likely put up a good fight for 2 or 3 years with Brady, but ultimately land back right where we started, possibly this season in 2022. We'd be looking at possibly starting a bridge quarterback like Jimmy Garoppolo or Baker Mayfield this year. We'd be struggling to sign talent under, head coach Anthony Lynn or another head coach that we signed not named Brandon Staley. We'd be looking at, the 2023 season, eagerly awaiting the draft in hopes of landing a new quarterback. The 2022 Chargers would likely be at the bottom of the AFC West for another 3 or 4 seasons. It would have been bad. But that didn't happen. Not with Herbert. Not with this defense now, right? Everything happened the way it needed to happen. This defense that now features Derwin, Bosa, Mack, J.C. Jackson, they're ready. This offense that ranked top 5 in 2021, led by Justin Herbert, a lot of talent on offense, Keenan and Mike. Not with this coaching staff that is ushering in the future of this team and finally embracing the mentality of a winning culture. We would have missed out on all of this had we signed Tom Brady in 2020. This team is ready. And when you get down to the root of it all, when you take a look at the big picture of this whole conversation, this whole debate, it's because we drafted Justin Herbert. All this change started with the drafting of Justin Herbert. So guys, Brady, my bottom line here to close out this video, Brady is possibly the greatest player in the history of the NFL. And yes, it would have been exciting to see him in powder blues. And yes, he probably would have given us a real solid chance at the big game. But as time continues to go on, that decision, even with the intentions of immediate gratification, immediate success, sign Tom Brady, win championship now, I feel like that would have nosedived into a spectacular crash for the Chargers. One that would have put this team off course for maybe another decade. Sure, we couldn't, have known that back then. We couldn't have known how truly special Herbert was going to be, but I believe everything falls in place the way it did for a reason, right? Maybe I'm a kind of a destiny guy. Because Herbert was worth waiting for. His development was worth waiting for. This roster construction was worth waiting for. Staley was worth waiting for. And this duo will not only offer a huge chance of winning a Super Bowl, the Chargers' first ever Super Bowl over the next few seasons, especially with the loaded roster we have right now, but also for the better part of the next few decades. Because with Tom Brady, we would have had him for a couple of years. Justin Herbert is going to be here for 15, 20 years. Because I don't know, what is perhaps the biggest reason of all is that the Chargers with Justin Herbert are better than the Chargers with Tom Brady. And I think I've kind of proven that in this video. And this is a team that will now be considered contenders for a very, very long time, not just 2 or 3 years. Because so long as Herbert is on this roster, the Chargers will always be among the most dangerous teams in the NFL. So did the Chargers make the right choice in not signing Tom Brady? As time has gone by, has that maybe decision been made a little bit more clear? In my opinion, yeah. Justin Herbert is by far the better decision for the Chargers back in 2020 and going forward. The butterfly effect we talk about all the time, very evident that it has made this team a lot better, not just for a few years, but for very many years to come. And now with all this time, all this preparation, all this change, this team is ready. And the wait will have been worth it, Chargers fans. Bolt up, baby. This Chargers team is ready to strike. Justin Herbert, undoubtedly the better decision here versus Tom Brady. An interesting theory nonetheless, one that I wanted to make a video on, but one that, in my opinion, with all the things that I listed out in this video, was not the right call. Brady to LA would have ended in disaster. Justin Herbert in LA, this gives us a very bright future. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for indulging me throughout this last couple of days. You know, recovering and bouncing back. Even in this first video, felt a little bit off, but had a lot of fun talking this topic. And get excited, guys. As for other content that we had planned that we had to push off, that will still be coming out. Sims Sundays, I'm hoping to find a day in the week to make up for this last episode, but we will continue on Sunday, hopefully with episode 3. Of course, all of these featuring 2 games as we go on. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. If you liked what you saw here, hit us up with a like and sub on your way out. We'll see you next time, and as always, bolt up and stay frosty. Justin Herbert was always the right call, and one that we are super lucky as Chargers fans to have on this team for very many years to come.